The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains of Helen Parker's kitchen, painting delicate patterns on the worn oak table. The aroma of fresh tea and buttered toast filled the air, soft reminders of comfort and routine. Helen sat quietly, stirring her tea in slow circles, savoring the warmth of the cup between her palms. This was her favorite hour, the gentle hush before the world woke up, peaceful, warm, and free from the noise of the outside world. She had earned this quiet. For 40 years, Helen had worked tirelessly, first as a young wife, supporting her husband's small hardware business, and later as the owner of her own bakery after his passing. She'd raised her son, Ryan, through grief and scarcity, turning pain into determination. Every loaf she baked, every pie she sold, had carried a piece of her heart. And now, in her early 60s, she was finally reaping the reward of that labor. Her bakery, the Honey Crust, had become a local favorite. Her bills were paid, her customers adored her. For the first time since her husband's death, she could finally breathe. Then came the knock on the door. Helen frowned slightly, surprised. Few people visited unannounced. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door and froze. Ryan stood there, his smile tight, his eyes unreadable. Behind him, his wife Tina scrolled on her phone, barely glancing up. "Ryan," Helen said softly, surprise and delight warring in her chest. "I didn't expect—" He stepped past her before she could finish. "Wow, Mom, this place looks nice. Guess business is good, huh?" His tone was light, but something sharp hid beneath the words. Helen smiled politely. "The bakery's doing fine. Would you like some tea?" Tina looked up long enough to flash a practiced grin. "Sure, Mrs. Parker. I've been dying for something home-cooked. We've had such a rough week." As Helen moved about the kitchen preparing the tea, the tension hung heavy in the air. Ryan sat at the table, eyes darting around the small but cozy home, taking in every polished surface and neatly stacked bill. He had once been her pride, her only child, her reason for surviving the dark years after her husband's death. She'd believed she'd raised him to be kind, grateful, hard-working. But lately his phone calls had grown colder, shorter, more distant. "Mom," Ryan began finally, voice casual but sharp. "I was looking at some numbers online. You know how much small bakeries can make? Some pull in 6 figures a year." Helen froze mid-step, teapot in hand. "I don't know about that. Tina interrupted, her tone syrupy sweet. "We're just saying, it's impressive. You've done so well. With all that money, it must be hard keeping track of it all." Helen set the tray down slowly. Her stomach tightened. She'd known this conversation might come. She could hear the hunger behind their smiles. "I manage fine, dear," she said gently. "Every penny is hard-earned." Ryan leaned forward, elbows on the table. "That's exactly why we're here. Tina and I have been struggling. Rent's gone up. Her car broke down. We just thought, maybe you could help out." Helen blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. "Help how?" Tina's tone hardened. "A few thousand would go a long way. Family supports family, right?" Helen's heart ached. "Ryan, I've helped you before. Your tuition, your first car, your wedding." Ryan cut her off, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Yeah, but this is different. You're comfortable now. You wouldn't even miss it." His words struck her harder than any blow. For a moment Helen saw not her son, but a stranger one, who looked at her not with love, but entitlement. "I'm not rich, Ryan," she said quietly. "I just live within my means. I can't keep rescuing you from choices you make." Ryan's jaw tightened. "So that's it. You'd rather hoard your money than help your own son?" Tina scoffed. "Wow, no wonder he doesn't visit much. I guess love has a price tag here." Helen's lips trembled, but her voice stayed calm. "You should go, both of you." Ryan pushed his chair back so hard it scraped the floor. "You'll regret this, Mom. Don't expect us to come around again." The door slammed. The silence that followed was deafening. Helen sank into her chair, tears streaming down her face. The tea had gone cold, but her heart burned. "Where did I go wrong?" she whispered. But somewhere deep inside, another voice answered, "You didn't." He did, and for the first time a small seed of resolve began to grow. The following morning, Helen woke with swollen eyes and a heavy heart. The house felt emptier than ever, not because Ryan had left, but because of what he'd taken with him, trust. She brewed her tea but couldn't taste it. Every sip carried memories of a little boy who once clung to her apron, who'd said, "You're the best mom in the world." Where had that boy gone? 2 days later, the phone rang. Her heart leapt before she could stop it. Maybe he wanted to apologize. But as soon as she heard his voice, that fragile hope died. "Mom," Ryan said briskly, "if you're not going to give us cash, at least loan it. I'll pay you back when I can." "Ryan," she said softly, "this isn't about money. It's about respect. You came into my home, demanded what wasn't yours, and spoke to me like a stranger." He sighed loudly. "You're being dramatic. You don't know how hard it is for us." Tina's voice cut in from the background. "Maybe she doesn't care, Ryan. Some people just sit on their savings while their family struggles." Helen's voice trembled. "When your husband was a child, I skipped meals so he could have milk. Does that sound like selfishness to you?" Silence. Then Ryan muttered coldly, "If that's how you want it, fine. Don't expect to see us anymore. You'll die with your money, Mom, alone." The line went dead. Helen stared at the silent phone for a long while. No tears came this time, only an ache, hollow and deep. She had given him everything: her love, her strength, her sacrifices, and somehow it had never been enough. That night, she went to her bakery, turning on the soft yellow lights and standing in the quiet. Her hands rested on the counter where Ryan once sat as a boy, licking frosting from his fingers. "I raised you better," she whispered. "I raised you to stand on your own." And then she began to bake. The rhythm of kneading and stirring brought her peace. Flour dusted her arms like snow, and the smell of warm bread filled the air. For the first time in days, she found comfort in her work and her strength. And as she baked, a plan began to form, not one of anger, but of justice. If Ryan measured love in money, then she would show him what true value looked like, not with shouting, but with grace. Weeks passed. Helen's bakery remained busy, but her heart stayed heavy. The customers who came in smiled and chatted, oblivious to the ache behind her eyes. One evening, after closing up, Helen sat at her table, flipping through old invoices and her modest savings book. The paper smelled faintly of yeast and thyme. And then she thought if her work and her money meant nothing to her son, perhaps it could mean everything to someone else. The next morning, she visited her lawyer, Mr. Collins, a kind man who had known her family for decades. "Helen," he said after she explained her wish, "are you sure about this?" She nodded. "Yes, I want to set up a foundation, the Parker Fund for single mothers trying to start small businesses. I want it in my husband's name." He smiled softly. "That's a beautiful legacy." She exhaled deeply. "I want my hard work to help someone who deserves it, someone like the woman I used to be." "And your son?" he asked gently. Helen looked down at her flour-dusted hands. "He'll get what he's earned, my love, and a lesson he won't forget." She instructed that Ryan receive $1 and a letter written by hand. That evening, she sat down to write. "I spent my life giving you everything I could, not to make you rich, but to make you kind. You saw my hard work and mistook it for wealth. You asked for money, but what you needed was understanding. So here is my final gift, the truth. Money fades, character endures. I hope one day you'll see the difference. With love, Mom." When she sealed the letter, she felt lighter. For the first time in months, she slept peacefully. Months passed. Helen's bakery flourished. She began hosting free baking classes for struggling mothers and young women who needed encouragement. Her kitchen, once filled only with silence, now rang with laughter, the clatter of mixing bowls, and the smell of hope. Meanwhile, far across town, Ryan's life began to unravel. The car broke down again. His job prospects dwindled. Tina's patience wore thin, and one evening, she left saying she was tired of waiting for luck to turn. When the divorce papers arrived, Ryan sat in his small apartment, staring at the walls. For the first time, he felt truly alone. He thought about his mother, her voice, her patience, her steady love. Shame curled deep in his chest. He wanted to call her, to say he was sorry, but pride kept him silent. Until one gray morning, a letter arrived from Mr. Collins' office. Helen Parker had passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 years after their last conversation. Ryan's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, her letter. As he read it, his vision blurred. By the time he reached her final words, money fades, character endures, tears were streaming down his face. He learned, through the attached documents, that his mother's entire estate had gone to the Parker Fund. And in a cruel but perfect symmetry, his name appeared only once beside the single dollar she had left him. But it wasn't the dollar that broke him. It was the letter. He sat there for a long time, clutching it like a lifeline. For the first time in years, he saw his mother not as a source of money, but as a woman who had given everything and asked for nothing. And in that moment, Ryan decided he would earn her forgiveness not in words, but in deeds. 3 years later, the Honeycrust Bakery still stood proudly at the corner of Maple and 3rd. The window displayed a sign, now operated by the Parker Fund, empowering women through work. Inside, a group of women chatted cheerfully as they baked. Among them stood a man in his 40s, flour on his hands, his expression soft and humble. Ryan, he had asked to volunteer not for money but for redemption. The foundation had accepted him with open arms. At first, the other bakers didn't know who he was. He didn't tell them. He just worked quietly, diligently, sometimes with tears slipping into the dough. And as months turned into years, he began to feel something he hadn't in a long time: peace. One day, after the shop closed, Ryan unlocked a small box he kept under the counter. Inside was his mother's letter, folded and worn at the edges. He read it often, but that evening, the words hit differently. He smiled faintly through tears. "You were right, Mom. Money fades. Character endures." He looked around the bakery, the laughter, the light, the scent of bread, and for the first time, he understood what she'd been trying to teach him all along. Helen's portrait hung by the window, sunlight catching the silver frame. She was smiling, apron dusted with flour, eyes kind. Ryan touched the frame gently. "I hope I'm making you proud." Outside, the evening sun dipped low, casting golden light over the sign that bore her name, the Parker Fund, baking hope, building futures. And somewhere beyond that glow, Helen's legacy lived on, not in her savings, not in her bakery, but in the hearts she'd healed, including the one that had once broken hers. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge wasn't what she took away, it was what she gave: love, faith, and a lesson that would last forever.